Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Grayson Gee, and I serve as a technology policy analyst with the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And I have the pleasure today of moderating our discussion panel, Handing Back the Reins, Empowering Parents and Protecting Children in the Digital Age. Thank you so much for being here today. Before we get started with our panel, we are very honored to have a special guest with us this afternoon, Senator Angela Paxton, and we will soon transition to her in just a moment. We're looking forward to visiting with her. Senator Paxton, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Um,
Wonderful. Well, thank you
well,
so much for being
I
here.
think I think technology is being good to us at the moment, right?
Great. Yes, it is. Well, thank you so much again for being here. I know you're very busy, and we greatly appreciate your time with us today. Before we begin our panel discussion, I just wanted to briefly talk with you and get a little bit of the heart behind why you filed this bill, Senate Bill 2420, and the motivation behind it.
Well, thank you. And first of all, I want to thank you for and TPPF for hosting this webinar for people who are interested in this, particularly for parents. And I would say that is my motivation in being part of carrying the App Store Accountability Act. They passed this in Utah. I believe that the governor is going to be signing it this week. And we need to bring this protection to Texas for our kids that are so immersed in a culture of technology. You know, my background is in education. I was a teacher and a school counselor for more than 20 years. And and I'm also a mother. I have 4 grown kids. I've got 5 grandchildren now, with one on the way this coming August. I always find a way to work that into the conversation. But that really is what I think gives me context for this as a parent myself, as a grandparent myself, but also just what I watched happen during my time as a teacher and a school counselor. And when my kids were in middle school, high school, cell phones were starting to become the big thing. The adults had them, but it was a kind of a new thing for the kids to be having them. But it didn't take long because, there's that peer pressure that parents feel, right? All the other kids have one. My kids would like, I have to have one. Everyone has one. I was like, that's why you don't need one. You'll never be anywhere where you don't have access to a cell phone. But they were cell phones. They weren't smartphones. They weren't the same animal that we're dealing with today. And one of the things that became immediately apparent to me as these devices became more and more a part of kids' lives was, number one, it was having a negative impact. There was an entertainment value, there was a curiosity value, there was kind of that upside, there was an energy and excitement around it for kids. But there was also a really dark side. We started hearing for the first time about something called cyberbullying. And we were all familiar with bullying. Everyone's dealt with that. All of us have that are adults now. Cyberbullying, though, where a kid, in days past, a kid could go home from school, they could at least get away from it. Not with cyberbullying, because it followed them home. And we started hearing tragic stories, sometimes even involving suicide, where a child was just so overcome by the negativity of what was happening online. So, as we were walking through all of this, we moved into the internet, into social media platforms. And one of the first things I noticed as I was working with parents was the challenge it was, because parents were having to parent their children through something they had not been parented through themselves. I used to think about, when my kids were coming of the age to drive. I remember when our oldest son, Tucker, he was 15, and I'm like, okay, well, how are we going to do this, right? And I thought about how my parents did driver's ed with me. I did it at my school. I knew people that did parent driver's ed and that sort of thing. but I had something to go from, right? I was like, people might say, I'm going to do just like my parents did, or they might go, I'm going to do exactly the opposite of what my parents did. But you had something to work from. With this kind of stuff, parents don't really have anything to work from. And even today's young parents, what is now in existence is really different from what they grew up with. Again, the difference between a cell phone and a smartphone. So my kids are all of the age where they're starting to have their families, and I'm watching that. So, with the advent of all of these things, we've also seen a tremendous emergence of increasing anxiety and depression in young people, even elementary age kids. And I will tell you, 20 years ago, when I was in the classroom, no one was dealing with that. And I'm not saying it didn't exist, but it was much more uncommon. Now it is commonplace for kids to deal with anxiety and depression. So, these are things that we can't ignore. And one of the things that is encouraging to me is that the brain science has now caught up with explaining why this stuff is happening. There's some great there are great podcasts, great books that can educate people about this, but this is something I've been very interested in and been following very closely. So, there is a book called Dopamine Nation I would recommend to your listeners and watchers today, by Dr. Anna Lemke from Stanford. But, addiction can come in many, many forms, but we're looking at, right here, we're looking at just a black hole of many of these kinds of things. Adults are struggling with dealing with it, and our kids are struggling with it too. So this is one of the reasons I was so excited last session to sponsor in the Senate House Bill 1181, which was age verification for online porn sites. So pornography, as I'm sure everyone that's listening and watching knows, it's barely 2 clicks away on any smart device. And it doesn't matter how old you are, that's true on the device. And so we also know that there are algorithms where you don't have to be looking for something like pornography, it finds you. So that's especially damaging for children. And we also know that the earlier a child is exposed to pornography, harmful material is what we call it in the penal code in Texas, the earlier a child is exposed to that, the more likely they are to become addicted. And that, of course, opens the floodgates to a lot of other damaging, harmful things the rest of their lives, and it dominoes into their families as they get older. So that was important legislation last session. This session, as we've continued to work on this and think about how we can help give parents tools to protect their kids, but also teach and train their kids how to take care of themselves. I'm really excited about the At-Bill Accountability Act. It really has 3 main features that I think are very helpful. It has parental consent for minor users. So it requires a parent to consent to their child having access to a platform, to an app through the App Store on their device. The second thing that it does is it requires a truth in advertising. It requires the apps to be upfront about the maturity level, if you want to call it that, the age appropriateness level, and why that category is the right thing. So it wouldn't be enough to say, like with movies, it's rated G. Why is it rated G, right? It's rated R. Why is it rated R? And we're used to that with movies and other kinds of media where those reasons are listed. So this will require that sort of transparency from the app stores and giving transparency to parents. And then finally, it will require an age gating feature or age verification. And this is really important. We've done this for decades in Texas in all kinds of different ways. We require age gating for alcohol purchase. We require it for tobacco. We require it for a lot of different things. And so this will require that the App Store knows, is this a kid or is this an adult that I'm dealing with, and then the appropriate protocols can be followed. So I think it's a great step forward in the tool belt that we're trying to create for parents. You know, at the end of the day, I'm a state senator, and it is my job to pass laws and to make sure certain laws don't pass, right? Because both of those things are true. But government has an important role in these kinds of things where we create safety for the vulnerable people among us, and children have always been considered in that category. But at the end of the day, I think, especially the folks that are listening to this today, that understand the sort of great work that TPPF has done, we all know government is not the answer to this. Parents are. Kids don't belong to the government. They belong to their parents. And if I could say anything, it would be, if you are a parent, thank you for stepping into that important role. But I just want to encourage you not to be woke, but to be awake and pay attention to the things that are happening with your children. They need you to be involved. They need you to be the parent. And this is something that I think will help parents be parents. It's an appropriate role for us as government, but at the end of the day, your kids are counting on you. And so thank you, TPPF, for what you guys are doing to help us get this message out there. We're going to be moving this through, the House and the Senate, with people can call in and be supportive with their House members, with their senators, so we can get this passed. We've had good success with this kind of stuff in the Senate. Very strong bipartisan support. I expect that, but I don't take it for granted. So I'd love to have everyone's support on that. But thank y'all for helping promote it, and thanks for giving me an opportunity to tell you why I care about it so much.
Yes, well, thank you so much, Senator Paxton. It's such an honor that you were able to join us, and we greatly appreciate your efforts, and we look forward to continued collaboration. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. All right, now let's transition to our expert panel, where we'll break down this type of legislation, the App Store Accountability Act, and discuss its necessity, the aspects of the way it's applied, the different notions of harm that exist. First, I'd like to transition to David Dunmoyer, but before we do, let's introduce all of our panelists. First, we have David Dunmoyer, who's the campaign director for technology policy here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. After we hear from David, we'll then go to speak with Melissa McKay, the founding chair of the Digital Childhood Alliance. And then we'll switch to John Reed, Senior Policy Counsel at the Digital Childhood Alliance. And then finally, we'll hear from Casey Stefanski, Executive Director of the Digital Childhood Alliance. David, we'll start with you. We're here today discussing the concept of App Store age verification. The Texas Public Policy Foundation has long advocated for the welfare of children and the strength of the American family. As we've studied the intersection of technology and childhood, our research has exposed a concerning reality about kids and their use of technology. So I wanted to ask, to kick it off, why is this type of legislation so crucial to begin with? What are the type of harms that children are facing here?
Yeah, well, thank you, Grayson. And first, I echo your comments about Senator Paxton's leadership on this, and she really hit at the core of the why. And so I think she gave me a nice little avenue too to really substantiate that with the research and with the data. And so to answer your question succinctly, about 5 years ago, when we started researching kid safety here at TPPF, there's a thesis that we wanted to explore. It's a two-part thesis, and simply, our children are being robbed of their childhood, and parents are rendered helpless against trillion-dollar tech companies that are engineering a crisis. That's quite a thesis. Demands here at TPPF a lot of data, a lot of analysis, and that's exactly what we've done. We spent the better half of, like I said, the last half decade looking into this issue, and I'm not going to talk until I'm blue in the face on all the specific statistics, but I just want to highlight the broader trends and what we found and what other folks have identified as to the why for what's happening to our kids. So around 2011, that's an important timestamp. That's when we start to see this massive inflection point on kids really being robbed of their mental health, their agency, their well-being. And that year is important because from the mid 1990s up until around 2010, we actually saw dramatic gains made in our country and in the entire Western world for a decrease in anxiety, suicidality, depression, and a lot of the general welfare components that we associate with the holistic well-being of a child. So again, 1990s until about 2010, we saw those numbers go down, which is great. Then 2010 onward is when we start to see a reversing of that trend. And really, 2011 being that timestamp, well, in the last 4 years predating that, we had the introduction of the iPhone. We had Facebook really starting to hit its market saturation. We had other companies that were entering the mainstream and shifting from what was initially and purportedly a way to connect people and kids with different communities and engagement groups. And it turned into the monetization of eyeballs on screens. So 2015 is the next checkpoint. That's where we can start to see on all the studies that have been conducted what researchers will call the hockey stick effect. So the hockey stick effect, of course, meaning a dramatic uptick. And for girls, we see the dramatic uptick in anxiety and body dysmorphia and eating disorders. And for men in particular, aggression, irritability, and lack of social cohesion. And if you don't want to take my word just based on that time overlay alone, TPPF, we conducted research on this. We have something like 60 pages documenting how there is a direct link between social media, these products, and the different digital devices resulting in this increase. But if you don't like our research, you name an organization that tends to do health research. Just this morning, I was looking up, you have Yale, you have Harvard, you have Johns Hopkins, you have think tanks on either sides of the spectrum, Ethics and Public Policy Center, the Brookings Institute, and to Senator Paxton's point, book after book after book, and Jonathan Haidt really being at the forefront of all this, it is now axiomatic that there is a direct relationship between these digital devices and the precipitous decline in the well-being of our children. And if you ask me, Greyson, my why personally, when we were doing this research, of course, we wanted to look into specific stories and anecdotes on top of the data. And there's a story I always share when I'm talking to anyone who will listen to me about kid safety. And it happened here in Texas a few years back. And it was a young girl by the name of Leilani Walton, who was 8 years old. And succinctly, the story is, she went on a family vacation and they were coming back from about a week away from home. And stepmom, as she's driving Leilani back home, said, "Hey, I'd love to take you to the community pool so we can finish out vacation. I'm going to take a quick nap and then we'll head off after that." So stepmom takes her nap. She comes upstairs and she finds her daughter, Leilani, hanging from her neck by a rope in the closet. And she was not a victim of suicide. She was a victim of the TikTok blackout challenge, which explicitly and algorithmically encouraged its users to hang themselves with ropes and purse strings and other things up to the point of asphyxiation. And we see stories like this happening time and time and time again. And at this point, the only thing that isn't clear in the data is, again, not if there's an increase in anxiety and suicidality and these other horrendous traits, because the jury's in. It's clear. It's what's going to happen 10, 15, 20 years down the road when this anxious generation, to take Jonathan Haidt's term, that's been reared on this technology becomes of age where we expect them to have jobs and have families and build community. What the long-term effects are, that's the only thing we don't know. And so, of course, to be proactive, as much as the horse is out of the stable a little bit here, we need to make sure we're mitigating against additional subsequent harms that we haven't fully studied or analyzed yet. And the last thing I'd say on this point, I had really a two-part thesis. The second is that parents are rendered helpless. And when we're looking at companies like Apple and Google, these aren't small mom and pop companies that lack sophistication. They have the most potent and powerful algorithms on planet Earth. They're multi-trillion-dollar companies combined, and they are pointing the barrel of their addictive product at kids and knowing that parents, no matter how hard they try, are not going to be able to parent the way they want to. And we did polling on this that found that 80% of parents in Texas don't believe that tech companies are doing enough to protect children online. But further, when we drilled in on the questions to find out more and more in their why, 90% want more tools to protect their children online. And these are coming from parents who use VPNs or different filters or other tools that they're purchasing. They recognize tech needs to do more. But the real kicker that'll lead into the other expert panelists is that 91% of parents in Texas think they should be able to verify what their child is using, what apps they're downloading, and what App Store purchases they're making. It's overwhelming. 91% of parents recognize the second part of this thesis. It's a civilizational crisis. And the very last thing I'll say, and I promise this is the last thing, Senator Paxton, for folks who don't know, she has been a stalwart leader on this issue. And she mentioned House Bill 1181, which is age verification for porn. Now, that's an important bill for a whole host of reasons, but I want to focus on two. One is we already have an age verification mechanism in Texas. And so to any of the folks who 2 years ago said it can't be done, this is unreasonable or burdensome, well, it's done. So that argument, it's moot. The second point, we legitimately had trade associations and different tech companies show up to that hearing when Senator Paxton was laying out this bill, dropping off one-pagers saying they were opposed to age verification for pornographic, the most grotesque content. They were opposed on account of the economic harm that would befall their interests because they were going to lose 50% of their user base. These companies know exactly what they're doing. It's all about the pecuniary bottom line and anything they can do to pull parents from having more control, because that would ultimately mean less eyeballs on the screen, less incendiary content. Big tech will continue to work tooth and nail to effectuate that. So with that, Grayson, that's the why. That's the impetus behind this and why I'm so passionate to work with all the folks in this live stream discussion today to get this done this session.
Yeah, well, David, I mean, your presentation on top of Senator Paxton's makes clear that the data is irrefutable. These platforms and these technologies have a negative impact on children, and parents are seeing it firsthand. And it's fitting that we have such a parent here today to discuss her advocacy and her passion for children, Melissa McKay, who is the founding chair of the Digital Childhood Alliance. Melissa, thank you so much for being here with us.
So glad to be here today. Thank you, Grayson.
Of course. So I wanted to ask, share with us a little bit your journey advocating for App Store age verification. Where did the idea come from? And tell our audience a little bit about the recent success that's been had in Utah.
Yeah, happy to do that. So I started my child advocacy, it was almost 10 years ago, and it was just harm in my own family circle, nephews, brothers, sisters, their kids. So I started researching, why are so many kids being harmed online, right? Like, is it the parents' fault? Should teachers be doing more? And as I really dialed in, I realized so much of this harm is caused by the App Store or the device. And so about 2 years ago, I did a bunch of online safety movements, fixed app ratings, default to safety. And then about 2 years ago, I started working on the App Store Accountability Act, really to target the three most exploitative parts of the App Store. So that's where this idea came from. And the governor just signed this in Utah yesterday. So we're really excited about that.
That's wonderful. We are thrilled about that, and we're greatly appreciative of your passion about this issue. Um, how does this bill in Utah equip parents to have control over the content and the device that their child uses?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And Senator Paxton touched on this a little bit, but there are three main parts of the bill. So the first is it's stopping these developers from entering into binding contracts with children without having parents involved. So as it sits right now, app stores only require kids 12 and under to be linked to a parent's account, which is kind of ridiculous if you think about it, because every time you download an app, you're entering into a terms of service agreement, which is a contract, and that will give the developer access a lot of times to the child's camera, their microphone, exact location. And children should not be entering into contracts, right? We all know that instinctively, and yet they're allowed to in app stores. So this bill simply requires any child under the age of 18 to be tethered to a parent account and then to have the parent make that choice if they can download the app so that they're not entering into these terms of service agreements with billion-dollar companies without the parent involved. Second is the deceptive app age ratings. And this is, I can't even believe this is a thing. I've been fighting this for 7 years. I did a 2-year movement alone on deceptive app age ratings. So unlike movies or video games, app stores don't have a third-party group like the MPAA or the ESRB to rate their apps. They're largely self-rated. So what you get is a lot of deceptive advertising. A recent Wall Street Journal expose found that of the 1,000 apps that they tested over a 24-hour period, 1/4 of them were deceptively rated as safe for kids. And where else in the world do you find companies that misrepresent 1/4 of their products when children are the carnage? You really don't find that anywhere. And the most harmful part of this is that the age ratings tie into the parental controls so centrally. So even if the parent spends the half hour or the hour to set up the parental controls, they don't work because kids are still going to download apps that are harmful to them and have backdoors to the internet. So this kind of fixes that in that it ties app ratings to the deceptive advertising laws so that if a parent or a child is harmed by deceptive advertising, there is some recourse. So that's the second part. The third part is the age verification component, which makes a ton of sense because app stores already have your ages. When you sign up for a new account, within the first, I think it's 4 steps, you have to enter your birth date. And then they collect a ton of data on top of that. Adults have to put a credit card in their digital wallet. So we're just asking app stores to use that data responsibly to protect kids and to communicate anonymous age categories to the developers so they understand if it's an adult or a kid that they're contracting with and if they've had consent. So very simple, just those 3 parts, and it passed Utah almost unanimously. So there's really bipartisan support for this bill. So glad to see it taken up in Texas.
Yeah, and it's good to see that it has so much momentum. To press in further on the legal questions that you brought up, we're glad to have John Reed here, who serves as the Senior Policy Counsel for the Digital Childhood Alliance. John, thank you for being with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
So, as we consider the various legal questions that this type of legislation might bring up, what would you say to opponents? And what would you say about the content neutral nature of this bill as it relates to its legality?
That's an excellent question. All of these, or many of these bills designed to help children get accused of violating the First Amendment. And so one of the questions I've been asked to focus on with my 30 years of training at the Department of Justice is whether this has a First Amendment issue. And the short answer is no. And let me give you more detail on that. When this bill was designed, you go back to how do you design a bill that avoids First Amendment issues in the sense that, how do you design a bill that doesn't just prevent kids from getting on the worst of the worst sites, doesn't just prevent kids from getting on sites that are addicting or minors. And so how do you design all that? The beauty is what Melissa just explained, that by focusing on contracts, the term of service that a child and we all are allowed to agree to before you can download the app, and focusing on the fact that minors can't download or can't commit to such contracts without permission from a parent, without a consent by a parent, allows you to avoid the First Amendment issues. This bill is content neutral. It applies to all apps, regardless of their content. Let me give you a little more on the First Amendment. The core First Amendment issue is that the state can't choose particular types of speech and disfavor them. Can't disfavor the speech of particular opponents or particular content. Here are the apps. If it does put its thumb on particular content, the court will ask, The court will take a strict look at whether there was a compelling reason for the restriction. It will ask if the restriction was narrowly tailored to the issue, and it's going to do an exacting legal standard. So the question to avoid a bill that even if it passes the First Amendment gets tied up in the court for years, how can we do that? Well, we don't focus on the content. This bill applies to all apps and applies to the contracting of all apps. And it doesn't matter the content of the bill. A developer can't change the regulatory obligation by changing the content. So in that sense, it's content neutral. The First Amendment doesn't apply. It also, the beauty of it is instead of the state deciding in advance, this is content that's bad for youth, bad for minors, and this is content that's appropriate, the parent decides. And the First Amendment doesn't apply to individuals or families. It applies to state action. So when you put parents in charge and let the parent decide what is appropriate for a child instead of the state, you avoid First Amendment issues. So by being content neutral and by having the parent decide what is appropriate for their child, who they know best, you avoid the First Amendment issues. And so I think this bill's been well designed to be operational quickly after it is passed and start to protect kids now as opposed to later. Now, there are other great bills that the Texas legislature is considering that, are going to work through those First Amendment issues, but this is a nice, clean one that can avoid many of those fights that other bills have to avoid terrible content.
Yeah. So what would you say to two questions? One, someone might say that the burden on the developer might be too great, or that there might be some conflict there that would cause harm or concern on the perspective of developers. And then also the privacy question. What does this do to privacy for families and kids?
Yeah, both great questions. So my last assignment at the Department of Justice was to look at Apple's App Store and determine if it violated the Sherman Act, the nation's anti-monopoly law. So that's given me a lot of insight into the structure of the industry and how it operates. And I can reveal what's public about that and tell this audience that the bill does a great job of not putting the burden on developers, but it's the app stores that have the real obligation here, which they can easily handle. So here's why putting the burden on the app stores is appropriate, and then I'll say how light the burden is on the developers. The structure of the industry is almost all your app downloads are through Apple's App Store or Google's Play Store. If you have an iPhone, you go through the App Store for your apps. Apple has been found to have deterred the use of alternatives to their app stores, and so that's why it all goes through. On the Google side, there are some competitors where you can, for the Android phones, the Samsungs and the Pixels, download your app, but their shares are really small, so small, in fact, that a jury found Google to have monopoly power, to be a monopoly on the download of apps. So what that means is if you can regulate the place where we buy the apps, the App Store from the Apple and the Play Store from Google, you've covered all the apps, essentially all the apps that are downloaded in this country. And the easiest place to get the verification are the places that have the data on you and know whether you're an adult or a minor, and that's Google and Apple. As Melissa explained, and I may give just a little more detail, the iPhone, of course, has the iOS operating system, and your Samsung or your Pixel has the Android operating system. Both of those allow Google and Apple to know what's on your phone. And so when you enter your birth date, they know it. Then they can verify it through all the tools that they have, and they do verify your age. And so they know whether you're an adult or a minor. They can verify that if you enter your credit card. They have facial recognition features. They know, their scientists know that minors interact with their phone differently than adults do. And so they can and do verify in the background seamlessly who's an adult and who's not. And so that lets Apple and Google easily know whether consent is required. The alternative would be to put the burden on the developers, and many of whom are small and mid-sized. And think of what would happen if you did the alternative is they would have to, the developer, create an app, advertise it on the App Store, give Apple its 30% take on any sales, and then the developer who has no relationship with the customer in advance has to figure out whether the consent is required, whether the person's a minor, and they would turn to Apple to do it. So just having Apple have that obligation in the first instance is kind of the least intrusive government way to do it and is appropriate. What that all means is there's just three requirements. I'm sorry it took me so long to get your question, Grayson. Three requirements on the developer. They can't enforce contracts that minors enter into without parental consent. And so going forward with this bill, that should be minor because all the contracts should have parental consent. Two, and this was important for Senator Paxton, they can't misrepresent their app ratings. Third, they can't share the age category data they get. So that's protective and appropriate, but it's very minor lift for the developers.
Yeah.
And then speaking to privacy, this bill protects privacy. Some argue that you're having your age category data is intrusive. The point is Google and Apple already have that. And what this does is it protects the minors and their privacy because now the parent can, when you sign when a child who's kind of unsophisticated signs the term of service, the parent can decide, is that app worth it? Or is the ability of the developer to geolocate the minor, to know where the minor is by longitude and latitude throughout the day, every day, is that appropriate? This will allow some parents to avoid that and have their child not be tracked over time and space,
Right.
and will protect privacy.
Right. Well, this type of legislation fits right into our foundation's impetus insofar as it relates to empowering parents to make decisions in the best interest of their child, giving them the opportunities to do that. As it relates to empowering children and families, the Digital Childhood Alliance seeks to do just that. And thankfully, we're here with the executive director of the Digital Childhood Alliance, Casey Stefanski. Casey, give us a brief overview of your organization and what your purpose is.
So, Melissa is our founding chair. Our organization came about out of a desire to focus solely on getting App Store accountability passed in every state and at the federal level. So, there's so many wonderful organizations that do so much. And I know Melissa worked with the National Center on Sexual Exploitation for a number of years on App Store accountability and just felt that this bill is so important. And we all feel that, and think it's necessary and worth just dedicating our time to making sure App Store accountability gets passed in states across the United States and at the federal level.
Yeah. Well, we thank you for your efforts. This is good policy, and it will serve the purpose of protecting kids online. With the remaining time that we have, wanted to kick it to Q&A, where you and the audience can ask any question that you may have of our expert panel. We have a few in the inbox already, and so these questions will just be open to anyone who wants to answer. You could have several people answer, just depends on whatever you'd like to do. But to kick it off, let's ask first. Someone asked, what's the political environment in Texas right now? Is there a lot of motivation for lawmakers to pass this type of policy?
Mhm. I can speak to that first, if that works.
Sure.
The short answer is, there has never been more motivation in the Texas legislature to pass comprehensive kid safety bills ever. I mentioned last session on House Bill 1181, age verification for porn. We had House Bill 18 last session in Texas. That was, the first real substantive step for Texas lawmakers to protect children online. I want to actually fast forward a little bit. January, right before session started this year, there was a joint committee hearing between the House and the Senate, and it was chaired by Jared Patterson in the House, Senator Hughes in the Senate. And the conclusion and takeaway was, first, lawmakers invited all the tech companies, Apple, Google, and so on. Not a single one showed up. And the goal was to hear from them, what are solutions, what are ways that we can protect kids in working with industry. So no one showed up. Second, lawmakers, by the end of this, again, the chairs of the committee have been monitoring these issues and working on them for multiple sessions. Other members were newer to this issue. And I want to quote Senator Lois Kolkhorst, who is a great champion patriot here in Texas. And she made the statement at the end of this hearing, which Senator Paxton was on, by the way, I should mention, that she was not naive in knowing that this was an issue, but she had no idea how horrible the digital age is on our kids. And this is after hearing from parent after parent after parent coming in, talking about Maureen Malik, for example, who is a fierce advocate here in Texas. Her son, David, he died as a consequence of some of the different digital material he was exposed to. And members heard enough stories like that and have heard enough silence and platitudes from big tech to where the takeaway at the end of that hearing, to quote Kolkhorst again, was big tech come with solutions or will come up with solutions that you don't like. And the App Store Accountability Act, actually, based on what Apple and Google have been proffering in the last couple of months in response to Utah and other states leading on the App Store accountability, they're trying to induce their own industry-driven solutions for more parental empowerment. I would note that they are incredibly weak, but this solution is a direct response to what Senator Lois Kolkhorst and other members on that committee said. So incredible momentum. I think, to everyone's points earlier, this does not mean that for folks listening, you should not get engaged, because there's always snafus and there's always monkey wrenches in this process. But I can say, spending most of my time in the Capitol talking to members and staff, there is a real appetite for significant reform this session.
Your question segues, rather, your answer segues right into another question which we received, which is, what can I do to help support passing this bill? What ways can family, I'll add a little bit of my own to expand on it. What ways can family and parents uh, encourage their encourage the passage of this legislation?
I don't know, Melissa or
Yeah, I'd be happy to take that one. So I know that people say I'm this, head of this child safety organization, but I'm just a mom, guys. Like I have 5 kids. I homeschool one of my kids. I go to Kinko's, I go to Alpha Graphics, I print off flyers that I made and I pass them out. I just go have conversations. I think one of the biggest misnomers is you have to be special or articulate or educated to help with this. And I would just say to any family out there, you can call up your representative, you can write an email. It's really, I think if there is a will, there is a way. And you can just, there's so many websites now that you can find out who your representative is. And they actually love getting emails from people who aren't lobbyists. That means more than 10 lobbyist emails. So I would just say, get online, look up your representative, and send an email.
And just to piggyback off of what Melissa just said, if you go to our website, digitalchildhoodalliance.org, we have a spot on there where you can contact your representative directly from there. It's more of a broad contact, but if you're in Texas, I'm sure TPPF has some advice.
Yeah, I would echo everything that's been said. I mean, and y'all have such a robust apparatus to get folks directly engaged. But this mock-up of the Capitol behind me, again, it's the people's house, it's the people's Capitol, and there's nothing that makes lawmakers, to the points made earlier, more empowered and feel like they're over the target when they hear from everyday Texans who are experiencing firsthand the harms of, or the challenges of, raising kids in the digital age. So show up. And I will say this, for any folks who are testifying or engaging in the process, our building is right down the street from the Capitol, and we're always happy to talk to folks about, if you want to testify or you want to engage. It's scary, it's daunting, but we're happy to walk folks through that. And ultimately, it is one of the most beautiful parts of the civic engagement process.
And it looks like we're almost out of time for Q&A, but to wrap it up, we can kick to Casey to give a few closing remarks.
Thanks, Grayson, and thanks to the panel for everything. Dawn Hawkins was supposed to be on our panel today and unfortunately wasn't able to make it. So I just wanted to kind of close with saying that the National Center on Sexual Exploitation has been a great partner to everyone in the fight against exploitation. So we're grateful for them and sorry that Dawn couldn't make it. But I just want to close by bringing us back to the why behind the App Store Accountability Act. For the past 3 years, the National Center on Sexual Exploitation has named the Apple App Store to its Dirty Dozen list. They've called it deceptive to the core. We agree. The HEAT Initiative and Parents Together recently released a report detailing 200 apps rated for children that promote dieting, anonymous chatting, sexual games, even tools for accessing banned sites. One app rated 12 plus lets kids engage in normal, spicy, or XXX spicy games. Another rated 4 plus includes roulette style shocks and promotes drinking games. Let that sink in. Parents are relying on App Store ratings to protect their kids, but those ratings, they're an illusion. They label poison as apple juice, and our children are the ones drinking it. We would never accept this in any other area of our kids' lives. We have safety standards for toys, for car seats, for food labeling. Why not for the digital playground they live in every day? The front door to much of the harm kids experience online is the App Store. It's where children are silently signed into contracts that hand over their data, their location, and their camera access without us parents ever knowing. And sometimes the consequences are devastating. One girl rejected a boy at school. He retaliated by creating AI-generated child sexual abuse material that looked like her and uploaded it to porn sites. She's still fighting to have it removed. That same year, Nkosi and Collective Shout found 127 apps that enabled the creation of AI-generated deepfake pornography and CSAM rated safe for 4-year-olds in the Apple App Store. It's not just a policy problem, it's a moral one. We need real ratings, verified parental consent, transparency, and accountability at the gatekeepers of our children's online lives. The App Store Accountability Act won't solve everything, but it will finally give parents tools before harm occurs. Because our children deserve much more than digital danger disguised as child-friendly fun. They deserve safety, they deserve truth, and they deserve better.
Very good. Thank you so much, Casey. And with that, we'll close. Thank you so much to our attendees for tuning in today and listening to our expert panel to discuss this important issue. If you are interested in learning more about the harms of social media and devices on children, be sure to visit texaspolicy.com and be sure to also visit digitalchildhoodalliance.org. Thank you all so much.